Chapter 17. The Fish and the Shark. Philip hadn't visited King Stephen's castle in years. As he was growing up, his father had wanted him to develop a relationship with King Stephen and Queen Leah, since they would eventually be family. But Philip's few visits had been haunted by the memories of Maleficent and the looming absence of Princess Aurora. The white stone was brighter than he remembered it, or perhaps they had tasked some unlucky servant with scrubbing every nook and cranny of the place clean before the princess's return. Philip lingered in the long shadow of the castle for as long as he could. The sword of truth was burning a hole in his pack atop Samson, and Philip glanced at the horizon for Joanna. He had seen no sign of her since they parted. "Father," Philip said, greeting a fallen tree as he might have the king. "Funny story. I was approached by 3 fairies who claimed I had magic, and they trained me so that I could steal the sword of truth and the shield of virtue to defeat Maleficent. But it turns out they were working for her the whole time. Thankfully, I have the sword and shield. No magic, though. I'm still only Prince Philip, Princess Aurora's future husband. However, I'm having second thoughts about that last part." It had been easy to give in to the betrothal when everything was out of his hands, and going against the current didn't seem worth it. Now, though, Philip wasn't sure he could go through with marrying Princess Aurora. She needed someone to keep her safe, but knights had been keeping people safe for ages without marrying them. The curse was a different story. For all their lies, the fairies' reaction to Joanna's and his thinking the curse would be avoided seemed genuine. If it would come to pass no matter what, that was even less reason for him to marry Princess Aurora. Anyone could guard her while she was in her cursed sleep. She would be protected, and someone else could try to find her true love, whoever that was. Maybe Philip's father wouldn't mind that, and maybe Samson would learn to fly. Meeting Briar Rose made the future seem less daunting, as if something in the universe was on his side and he wanted her on his. If King Hubert and King Stephen had needed so badly to unite their families, they should have done it themselves instead of sticking the responsibility on their children. Philip could find a different solution to help Princess Aurora. Who needs marriage when you have understanding and friendship and a horse that understands sarcasm?" he asked Samson, glancing once more to see if Joanna was approaching from the road. Her absence made him anxious. "All right, boy, let's go." Samson nibbled at Philip's pack, and Philip nudged him away. "You get Clarence once my feet are fully dry again." Samson huffed and took off toward the castle at an uncomfortable trot. The lanes around the castle were bustling with life. People ran from the castle to the farms and homes surrounding it, with bolts of fabric and baskets of food bundled up in their arms. Philip sidled Samson into the queue of people waiting to pass through the first gate of the keep, and kept his head down. The last thing he wanted was to be recognized and mobbed in public, and he also had no desire to reveal his foolishness to everyone. Philip left Samson in a small alley between the castle and the stuffed stables, placating him with an over-eager stable hand who would surely spoil him. Philip didn't know his way around the castle very well, but he suspected his father would almost certainly be in the hall where court was held, and that was the direction every servant was heading in, with platters of food and jugs of wine, so it was a safe bet. Philip slunk inside with a handful of guests and servants. Everyone was gossiping about the birthday and wedding, placing bets on when Princess Aurora would show up and whether Prince Philip had run away. Philip slithered into one of the alcoves meant for servants to wait in during the feast, and cracked open the door. Inside the hall, his father and King Stephen were in the middle of a drinking game, with not a care in the world. A jester serenaded them with his lute, and snuck drinks right beneath both of their noses. Philip didn't even need the shadows of sunset to conceal his hiding place. He was supposed to have arrived days earlier. Princess Aurora was going to meet her parents for the first time. Maleficent was going with the intent of destroying them all. And the two kings were playing a game. Nest of their own, what? His father was saying. Place to raise their little brood, eh? Philip furrowed his brows. Nest? He had never taken that much interest in falconry outside sport. Well, I suppose in time, said King Stefan. Of course, said his father. To the home. Philip peeked around the corner of the alcove as his father poured out another round, laughing loudly. And Philip was the irresponsible one? If they didn't even notice the jester's drunken state, how would they notice Maleficent? They don't know about the curse or Maleficent's plans, Philip whispered, trying to rein in the fury smoldering in his chest. They don't know it's all so dire. Philip stood on tiptoe to see the parchment rolled out on their table. It was building plans for a large castle, and the ramifications of his father's words hit him. The king had built a home for Princess Aurora and him, and he had done it without any input whatsoever from them. The design was huge and sprawling, fit for royalty, but far too big and self-important for Philip. There was even a separate wing for the parents. Philip's heart beat so furiously in his chest that his father's words were garbled in his ears. Lovebirds can move in tomorrow, King Hubert said. Lovebirds? They had never even spoken, and why would Princess Aurora want to leave her parents and home after only just meeting them? Tomorrow? Asked King Stefan, looking as horrified by the idea as Philip felt. But Hubert, they're not even married yet. His father laughed. Take care of that tonight. To the wedding! Philip leaned farther out of the alcove and was horrified to realize that the plans contained labeled nurseries. Philip recoiled. His father was unstoppable in the worst of ways. Here was a man who hadn't seen his daughter since her infancy, since he had swallowed her up and handed her over to 3 fairies for her own safety, and Philip's father was already making plans for her to move out. Not to mention Philip's well-known dislike for his betrothal and princely future. Yet King Hubert was barreling on as if Philip's thoughts didn't matter, as if Princess Aurora's opinions didn't matter, and as if all these decisions were his to make and not theirs. Philip jammed a fist beneath his chin to keep from shouting at his father. Eris had betrayed him, but at least she had eventually been upfront about it. She had acknowledged the knife she planted in Philip's back and treated him as reasonable when he took offense to it. King Hubert poured King Stefan another glass of wine, but King Stefan swatted his hand away. Now hold on, Hubert, King Stefan said. I haven't even seen my daughter yet, and you're taking her away from me. You tell him, muttered Philip. Neither of them noticed the jester collecting the spilled wine in his lute, and Philip suddenly understood the desire to drink floor wine from a lute. This conversation and these assumptions were unbearable. Getting my Philip, aren't you? King Hubert said. Philip groaned. What was he? A consolation prize? King Stefan sighed and said, Yes, but want to see our grandchildren, don't we? Asked Philip's father, and Philip had never wished more to be disowned. His father barreled over King Stefan's half-hearted response and flicked his beard. There's no time to lose. Getting on in years. To the wedding. He toasted his friend, and Philip glared from the alcove. Philip had always thought he had been obvious about his feelings, but apparently the two kings wouldn't have noticed Philip's presence or discomfort if their lives depended on it. King Stefan pressed a hand to his friend's shoulder. Now be reasonable, Hubert. After all, Aurora knows nothing about this. The jester fell back under the table, and Philip collapsed as he did, drawing his knees up to his chest. Hiding under a table was a tempting thought. Well, his father asked without a hint of concern. Well, said King Stefan, trying preemptively to console him, it may come as quite a shock. That showed what King Stefan knew. There was no calming down King Hubert of Artwine when he got going. Shock? His father spat out his wine and pounded his goblet on the table. My Philip a shock? What's wrong with my Philip? Philip nodded. It was nice to be defended, but King Stefan wasn't disparaging Philip. He was talking sense. Nothing, Hubert. The other king backed off as if he weren't a seasoned warrior, and Philip rolled his eyes. I only meant, why doesn't your daughter like my son? Said his father, closing in on King Stefan. Now, King Stefan said. He tried to stop King Hubert. I'm not sure my son likes your daughter. King Hubert threw off King Stefan's hands and prodded him. Harsh but true. King Stefan straightened his crooked crown and drew himself up. Now see here, I'm not so sure my grandchildren want you for a grandfather. Philip shook his head. Grandchildren again. It was oddly pleasing to hear his father defend him, though. Why, you unreasonable, pompous, blustering old windbag, shouted King Stefan. Unreasonable, pompous? Philip's father tore a fish from the table and wielded it like a sword. On guard, sir. Philip rose, no longer trying to hide, and sighed when they still didn't notice him. I warned you, Hubert. This means war. King Stefan picked up a plate and brandished it like a shield, parring each dull slap of the fish. Philip turned away. They sparred with the fish and the plate and made a mess of the dining hall. They probably wouldn't worry even if they did know what had happened to Philip. All they were concerned about were cradles, uniting their families, and wine. Philip would have to fix everything, because they were too far gone to help. Too joyous, too in their cups, too confident. They had to know that the sword and shield had been taken by now if they had their eyes on it. And would they even believe Philip when he told them about the curse? No, probably not. Philip had been the disappointing prince for years. They would never trust him over the princess's fairy godmothers. Laughter rang through the hall, and Philip couldn't even look at his father and King Stefan. What's this all about anyway? King Hubert asked, and Philip shook his head. Hopefully he had put the fish back. Nothing, Hubert, King Stefan said, chuckling. Absolutely nothing. And just like that, they were friends again, and their problems were forgotten. Children bound to fall in love with each other, his father's words were a touch slurred. Precisely, said King Stefan. His speech was much further gone, and Philip could make out the babbling of more wine being poured. And as for grandchildren, I'll have the royal woodcarvers start work on the cradle tomorrow. Philip closed his eyes, covered his ears with his hands, and tried not to scream. Hang it all. His duty, the betrothal, the curse. Philip might not have taken his role seriously in the past few years, but recently he had resigned himself to obeying. He had decided to put his own desires aside for the better. No more. If he and Princess Aurora, by the sound of it, weren't worthy of having a say in their lives, then Philip would live his life elsewhere. Trumpets blared outside, and he startled, then darted back through the little door he slipped in through. Had Princess Aurora finally returned? His Royal Highness Prince Philip, called out a herald on the wall. No princess. The stable hand must have told someone he was here. Philip would have to speak with his father now and get rid of him as quickly as possible so he could find Joanna. They had to prepare for the curse on their own. Philip raced to the stables. Samson was surrounded by a group of well-meaning stable hands, all trying to coax him into a stall. Philip whistled, and Samson perked up. Philip shoved his way through the crowd and climbed into the saddle. He needed to look as if he were just galloping up to the castle so that his father would assume the trumpets had sounded when he passed through the first gate. Philip was done being a pawn. He was done drifting through life without taking control. He was done letting his father dictate his future, and he was going to teach his father how irritating he could be. Philip pushed Samson into a gallop, weaving through the visiting crowd, and raced for the stairs of the castle. His father trotted unsteadily down them, glittering in his full King Hubert of Artwine regula. "Philip! Philip!" King Hubert shouted, raising his arms in greeting. "Philip! Ho, Philip!" Philip tried to bite back his frustration and schooled his expression as he dismounted from Samson. He knew the perfect thing, the only topic that had ever drawn out King Hubert's ear at King Stefan. "Hurry, boy, hurry! Change it to something suitable. Can't meet your future bride looking like that, but I have met her, father," said Philip, smiling as widely as he could. He embraced his father briefly and pulled back. King Hubert huffed. "You have? Where?" "Once upon a dream," said Philip. Even though he was joking, the idea was comforting. Marriage had always seemed like an inevitable disaster before, but the idea of marrying Briar Rose seemed as pleasant as she was. He picked up his father by the armpits and spun him around, humming the whole while. Philip never should have taken any guff from a man he could throw over his shoulder. "Oh, Philip, stop it! Stop that! Philip, put me down!" Philip did and stepped back. There were 2 angry spots of color on his father's cheeks, and Philip grinned. "Now," said his father, "what's all this dream nonsense?" "Oh, it wasn't a dream, father," Philip sighed. "I really did meet her." "Princess Aurora?" King Hubert asked, practically salivating. "Good heavens, we must tell Stefan." It took everything within Philip for him not to roll his eyes, but over his father's shoulder, Samson did. His father moved forward. "Why, this is the most—" "I didn't say it was Aurora." Philip pushed his father farther away. Briar Rose would forgive his use of her in this so long as it got them both out of there. "You most certainly did," said his father. "You said I said," Philip stated very slowly, then stressed the part his father would hate the most. "I met the girl I was going to marry." "I don't know who she was." "A peasant girl, I suppose." The look of incredulous fury on his father's face was the best vengeance of all. "A peasant girl?" His father choked on the words. "You're going to marry a— Why, Philip," he laughed and took Philip by the shoulders. "You're joking." "Yes, a peasant girl." That was the truly terrifying part of the whole ordeal. Not the evil fairy set to curse the princess come sunset, not the missing sword and shield, not the looming threat to humanity. Philip shook his head, and King Hubert turned to Samson. "Isn't he?" he asked. Samson shook his head too. "No!" His father stomped away. "You can't do this to me. Give up the throne, the kingdom, for some nobody?" His voice quavered, and he threw up his arms. "By Harry, I won't have it. You're a prince, and you're going to marry a princess." His crown toppled from his head, and Philip darted forward, catching it. "Now, father, you're living in the past," said Philip. "This is the 14th century. Nowadays, I'm still the king," King Hubert said, cutting off Philip, "and I command you to come to your senses." Because that was how sense worked, Philip walked away. His father hadn't changed at all, and he was still concerned only with what he wanted, not what was best for everyone. If King Hubert could be so selfish, so could Philip. "And marry the girl I love?" he asked, and remounted Samson. Even though he knew he was lying to anger his father, his words gave him pause. Wait, did he love Briar Rose? Surely love had to be harder won or more furiously fought for, but the word had come so easily. He had thought it so naturally and said it so freely. No, that was a foolish thought. Exactly! His father stomped and drew him out of his thoughts, and Philip beamed down at him. For a king, he was easy to rile up. Goodbye, father, Philip said, dropping the axe. Goodbye, father, said King Hubert. Marry the girl you... No, Philip, stop, come back. Worry about that if you won't worry about Maleficent, Philip said as he rode away, out the gate and toward the woods. He would have to intercept Joanna and find Briar Rose's cottage. But now he had time. If his father wasn't concerned about the sword and shield, that was his own fault. Philip would deal with Maleficent, but he wasn't marrying the princess.